If you're going to talk about the new biopic Michael with respect to it capturing the life and the story of Michael Jackson, aka MJ, king of pop, rock and soul, this film doesn't do that. But then if you're looking at it from the point of view of this film capturing the rise of Michael Jackson as a solo artist, the journey that it took for him to get there, I would say yeah, then this film does that. I say this not as someone who has just only seen the film, but as someone who used to be an MJ fanatic back in the day. Quick fun fact though. Many people that know me over the years know that usually I always have some type of eyewear as part of my outfit. But what many of you do not know is that my preference for this aviator style of glasses was inspired by Michael Jackson way back then. And we used to share the same birth date, which was one of my trump cards that I use against, fellow fans, just to show that I'm a better fan, that kind of thing. But most importantly, the reason why I'm commenting on this particular biopic is because I directed an animated musical as part of my master's thesis that happened to deal with the lived experience of a musician. So it required that I do some level of research into the music industry as a whole, studying the likes of Elvis Presley and obviously Michael Jackson. So I got that opportunity to really come back to his subject, to study him, this time not as a fan but as a creative researcher. It is from this background that I say that the film doesn't do justice to telling a comprehensive story about the life and the history of Michael Jackson. And I say that not as a criticism but as an objective take on what we have currently in theaters. For your information, what we have in theaters now was not the original version of the film. According to IMDb and the directors, was originally 4 hours long and would have stayed so were it not for some legal constraints that later on affected certain aspects of the film, particularly the whole third act of the film, which necessitated that whole section needed to be reshot again. In addition to that, some key figures such as Diana Ross and Janet Jackson also legally opted out not to be represented in this film, and so along with them, especially Diana Ross, went certain key parts of Michael's story. If you happen to have followed the development of the film over the years, you should have come across certain images that showed other aspects of Michael's story which you wouldn't find in this current 2-hour version. So I really believe that that original 4-hour version would have allowed for a comprehensive take on the life of Michael Jackson. I think it's fair to have this as a backdrop and to see what we have currently in theaters as a skillfully salvaged work, respectfully speaking, that had successfully navigated, legal constraints to still give us a good movie. In dealing with a documentary-based project such as this, it is quite a tricky thing to do as a director, as you have to make creative decisions based on reality, subjectivity, objectivity. These were some of the concepts I had to study for my project. And I studied that because I was trying to get a clear picture of how to direct such a project, where to keep history and where to exercise creative liberty to fill in the gaps. Through this study, I discovered that one way to go about such documentary-based project that may have many stakeholders and certain complexities attached to them is to tell it thematically, in the sense that there is a focus being placed on one particular thing rather than trying to tell it all. For example, when we take historic figures as Jesus Christ, there are many concerns as to why there are 4 accounts given about this particular individual that are considered now scripture. The understanding behind that is that it is one person being talked about by all these accounts, but then they each focus on different themes about this individual. So applying that to the case of this biopic of Michael Jackson, I can assert that given the legal setback and character opting out and God knows what else happened behind the scenes, the theme might have changed from telling a comprehensive story about Michael Jackson to now focusing on Michael's breaking into his solo career. From that perspective, I would then understand why focus was not placed on his brothers as well during their early days in the story, because it wasn't only Michael that was being hooked. I can then now understand why they squarely staged his father as the antagonist in the film against Michael, because with respect to Michael stepping into his solo career, then it makes sense that that be staged that way. But even with that, I have some issues with that, and I will talk about that later on. So reviewing this in the light of following the theme of Michael's rise into his solo career generally, what the film does is it recreates these iconic moments. Overall, if I should rate as to how it relates to what happened in history, reimagining of the off the wall, the costumes, yeah, I think that was really cool. Beat It, a lot could have been done there. Beat It would have really opened audience up to really understand how Michael thought creatively. When people think about Michael Jackson, it's almost like you consider him like a musician who gets, you know, some inspiration somewhere to sing a song. He sings a song and it becomes a hit. But this guy is very strategic in the music that he puts out and the way he goes about putting out the music. But with Beat It, it all started with this whole idea he had to communicate a message of peace. As the film captures, there was news, you know, violence and all these things about gangs and all that. When he saw the news and the idea was conceived to make a record that sends out a message to engender peace, what he did as the film captures, but if you don't pay attention, you may not get it. He had the idea of making the music with two rival gangs working together. He went into the hood and talked to these gangs, Crips and Blood. That was the name of these two rival gangs. He had a lot of convincing to do. It was chaos in the beginning, but then eventually it worked out. And so if you take a look at the original clip right now, some of the dancers were not getting the dancing moves right because those guys were actually real. Like, he picked them raw and brought them into the project. And him being able to make these two rival gangs work together on that set was the message of the song. And I really felt like the way it was captured in the film, if you don't really know the back end of the story, you may only view it as Michael now has a new music idea and he's teaching some dancers how to dance. That is how it will seem to you. Same thing with Trailer, with what Trailer did in the music industry and entertainment. Like, time should really have been, you know, dealt with on that. Billie Jean was really, you see, with these iconic hits, Billie Jean, Beat It, Trailer, if time should have been really given to delve in the creative process, it would have really done justice to showcase that side of it. Like, how that guy was really strategic. It would have given depth, not to only just seeing the music videos being but you really get to understand how that guy really thought. But the reimagining of the musical, it was very excellent. The costumes, the lighting, even with Thriller, they went back to shoot at the same exact location as Michael shot it, with that level of authenticity and excellence when it came to reimagining. It was really cool. I did notice that with the reimagination of the musical, it seemed almost like a montage of the music, in the sense that the film jumps from a portion of the making of a song to another. This is quite an identical approach that I had to take when I was directing my project. It helps when there's a lot to tell but you had limited time. Although I was thinking that were they also doing that because of legal constraints, that kind of be like, okay, you can use the music but you can't use the whole portion of the music, that kind of thing. Let me know in the comments what you think on that. I like the fact that the film touches on Michael's personal insecurities and struggles that he had growing up and how that led to his physical transformations, as we all would know. But except from the Pepsi fire incident, I feel like the other two struggles, and there wasn't too much emphasis to really capture the development of that whole situation. For example, with his nose, what the film presents as the reason for him having his first rhinoplasty surgery, that is the nose job, was not the only reason. It started with him coming to the experiences of adolescence, growing, acne and all these kind of things, and how the fans treated him at that time of his life, coupled with his father's, nagging at him with his nose. Then what broke the camel's back was that during a rehearsal, he broke his nose. All these things lining up gave the go-ahead for him to, hit that switch button. In terms of performance, I would give it to Jafar Jackson. Like, he really did his thing. I really was impressed, particularly with the intonation of Michael Jackson, like the way he spoke like him. It was really incredible. It was solid, very, very solid. I like the fact also of the costume, aspect. In terms of the dancing, for me, when I look at it, I can tell the difference between the real thing and the bad. If I'm to mark it like 100% out of it, I'll give him like a 90. Like, he really did his thing. You could see the flow and everything, but his acting, the part that really I was so hooked on was, the intonation, the way he spoke like Michael. It was really, really. What's with it with the Jackson's family, really? The level of talent that it has produced that has affected history is mind-blowing. Like, talk of Stevie Wonder, Tracy Chapman, Samuel L. Jackson. They are all roped in that whole family system. That family needs to be studied. I was also really moved by the acting of Nia Long as Katherine Jackson. Following this whole story over the years, one of the people that my heart really goes out to has been the mother of Michael Jackson. So to really see it happening in there, like, I would say one of the characters that I was really emotionally touched to was the mother. I really feel for her. Now, to my major issue with the film, I really did not like the way they squared up Joseph Jackson, that is Michael Jackson's father, against Michael. I get the point, like, the guy was really a tough dude, but I felt like they made it one-sided, and I agree on that with Matt Fides, who was Michael's friend, bodyguard, and confidant. He also said the same thing. I feel like there should have been a balance to it, because even Michael, in his only biography that he wrote, he said that my father did always protect us, and that's no small feat. He always tried to make sure people didn't cheat us. He looked after our interest in the best ways. I would say we were among a fortunate few artists who walked away from a childhood in the business with anything substantial. To this day, I'm so thankful that he didn't try to take all of our money for himself the way some parents of child stars have. Imagine stealing from your own children. My father never did anything like that. Having read this and having known the stories, I feel like the portrayal of Joseph Jackson in this movie was like really one-sided. Matt Fides also shares that during the latter years of Michael's life, especially when this whole allegation and things were going on and the media bombardment was like really heavy on Michael, he shared that Michael would request that his people get in contact with his father, like they contact his father for him, because he believed his father would know how to get him out of that whole mess, but they didn't. And if you listen to some of Joseph Jackson's interviews, he also said the same thing, that he has been trying to reach his son at the time, but there were systems put in place to block him. The point I'm making there was that even at that time, the guy knew the capabilities of his father and knew what his father could do, so he was reaching out. So yeah, the guy was tough, to an extent abusive, ruthless sometimes, but he did have his way of protecting his family. Probably should there be a sequel to this film, maybe they would balance it out. Regardless, in view of the theme that I believe that this film was geared towards, to showcase and also celebrate the music highlights of Michael, he entering into his solo career, yeah, the movie does that. Is good with that, entertaining, musical, relive those iconic moments and all those things. Dealing with this subject of Michael Jackson is a lot. There's a lot to deal with. In my opinion, should I have all the resources, the legal backings and approvals and everything, I would have approached it in the light of a trilogy, like we have the Lord of the Rings Part 1, 2, and 3, because literally you can divide Michael's life into 3 phases, and this is how I'd have put it. Let's say part 1 would have been to capture how the Jackson 5 was created and evolved from Gary, Indiana to Motown to becoming a global phenomenon. Because when you're talking of Michael Jackson, many people know more about in his solo artist career era. But what many would not know, maybe aside the name Jackson 5, was how much of a big deal even Jackson 5 was. I mean, they even had their own animation series and TV shows. If that whole era should be captured as part 1, it would give room to capture the Falcons, which was his dad's group. That is where the whole thing kind of started. Captured the incident with Tito and his father's guitar, which led to commencement of rehearsals in their homes, which allowed for Michael to be introduced into the group at the recommendation of his mother as well. Captured his relationship with his brothers, the inspirations that influences his roles, the clubs, the amateur contests, the road trips, the auditions, performing at the Apollo Theater, going all the way to California, Motown, meeting Berry Gordy, the record-breaking hits that they came out with even as Jackson 5, and even later when Jermaine left, they becoming the Jacksons. That whole piece, that is a whole era on its own. It gives context, much context to the complexities that he had to deal with as a person growing up, and the depth of experience and mastery that he had in the entertainment world before moving solo. Then part 2 would have been about Michael stepping into his solo career, the era of Epic Records entering into the picture, captured the evolving family dynamics, the Wiz coming in, Diana Ross, Quincy Jones, then Off the Wall, and all that came with Off the Wall, the Grammy snubbing that engendered Michael to really take on the biggest project that shut down the whole entertainment industry, and all the records that Thriller set, Motown 25 where he performed Billie Jean, the Victory Tour, the Pepsi collaboration and the fire incident, his personal insecurities, the surgeries, the Sony ATV catalog, and the magnitude of the cultural shift that he had at the peak of his career, exploring the things that he had to do to make his goals come to pass despite personal, family, societal, industrial odds. I believe that this part 2 would give like a true glimpse into his perfectionist nature and the visionary boundaries that this guy could explore. Like, it was wild. I think given a whole movie just dedicated to that in that way, I think would do that just then. Part 3, in my opinion, once again, if I had budget, my whole production and all these things, part 3 would have been to handle from the bad era till when he passed on in 2009. With part 3, it would give room to capture his quest to make another Thriller album again, to beat the record that he had already set, the balancing of that ambition with family, marriage and children now coming into the picture, the empire that he built, his stores, the philanthropy, Neverland, and the controversies that came with it, the tabloid bombardment, the cost of fame, and the untimely death. Undoubtedly, that part would be really melancholic, but yeah, you have to tell it all. What do you think about this lineup? Let me know in the comments what you think about this lineup. I wouldn't be surprised though if in the long run it happens that this whole thing becomes like a franchise where people can now go to opt for the right to make another Michael Jackson movie, but focused on different aspects of his story. I wouldn't be surprised. Do you think that would happen? Let me know what you think about that in the comments section, and I'll see you in the next video.